slides here that I would just kind of give an overview of some things I see going on this time of year that horse owners should maybe give some thought to. Now, this time of year is definitely.
Hey, Ed, will you do me a favor? Will you share your, before you get too far into this, will you share your screen like it's a slideshow? Like start your PowerPoint like it's a slideshow.
Okay.
Yeah.
Just go to a slideshow. Oh.
And from current slide.
Okay, from current slide. Okay.
There you go.
Okay, that'll work. Okay, all right. Well, again, this time of year is kind of a transitional period. We've got going on right now. Our cool season plants that were growing during the winter and the spring are starting to die out. That'd be things like ryegrass. You still may have some ryegrass kind of hanging on, some clover, some winter weeds are still maybe kind of hanging on, but they're starting to fade away here as the temperatures get warmer. However, I noticed the forecast for the weekend is going to be in the 70s, so it's going to keep these plants from dying off quicker than normal. They may hang around a little bit longer. So they're starting to try to fade out. And then we've got our warm season plants starting to come on. This would be things like Bermuda grass or Ryegrass that we typically use for summer pasture. They're starting to green up and grow. Although I've had a lot of calls here the last few weeks on people complaining that their warm season grasses really aren't growing too much. And I think a lot of that can be attributed to the fact that we have had some pretty cool nighttime temperatures. So I think that's kind of keeping our warm season plants from growing, and they may be behind just a little bit what they normally are. So again, we're kind of in a transition period. Those cool season plants, we need to get rid of them in some form or fashion here. A lot of them, especially the ryegrass, is probably getting to be awful mature and not very palatable for horses to graze. So either go in there and try to force them to graze those plants out, or maybe go in and just mow those plants down, try to get the pasture to a uniform height of about 2 to 3 inches, and that will encourage the warm season grasses to start to come on. So the bottom line is those cool season plants really probably aren't giving us a lot of nutrition right now, not really giving us a lot of production, so try to get rid of them. And start trying to focus on the warm season grasses. A good place to start is, have you taken a soil test lately? That's not something you need to do every year, maybe every 3 or 4 years, but it's not a bad idea to have a soil test that tells us some information like what the soil pH is, what the phosphorus and potash levels in the soil are. And soil pH is very important. For all of our forages, and the pH needs to be in the range of about 5.8 to 6.5. And it's very important because if the soil pH is too low, not only are your grasses not going to grow real well, also it impacts the efficiency of any fertilizers that are applied. So if you have a pH of say 5.2, you can put out a lot of fertilizer and the fertilizer just won't be used very efficiently. A lot of it'll just be wasted. So I always tell people if you only have a certain amount of money that you can put into your operation, look at the soil pH, and if the pH is low, you need to add some lime. That's really where you need to focus on, rather than spend a lot of money on fertilizer initially. Try to get that pH in the optimum range, again, 5.8 to 6.5. Now is a good time to fertilize your pastures because these warm season grasses, as I mentioned, are just starting to grow. An application of around 50 pounds of actual nitrogen per acre is ideal. Now, what form of nitrogen are you going to use? In the past, ammonium nitrate was a good fertilizer. You could put it out and it would not volatilize. You wouldn't lose much of it. Unfortunately, it's very difficult to find ammonium nitrate fertilizer anymore due to all the bomb scares and all with ammonium nitrate. It's getting very difficult to find it. So what a lot of the fertilizer companies have done is they developed a product called 330012. So in 100 pounds of that material, you basically have 33 pounds of actual nitrogen. So if I want to put out, say, 50 pounds of actual nitrogen, I could put out 150 pounds of this 330012 product, or 110 pounds of urea, or 385 pounds of triple 13. And the reason I put that triple 13 in there is just to show that you've got to put a lot of that material out to get a lot of value out of it. Because in 100 pounds of triple 13, you've only got 13 pounds of nitrogen. So you have to put out a lot of it to really get a lot of benefit out of the nitrogen. It's probably not the best source for nitrogen fertilizer. I personally kind of like that 330012 product. Now it does have some urea in it, so you will get some volatilization losses with it. But it's a lot better than just using the straight urea. The urea, if you put it out on a hot day when the temperatures are, say, in the 80s, you can lose a good bit of it. The other thing is, this time of year, again, if you use the soil test, you can put out any needed phosphorus or potassium fertilizer as well. But again, it's hard to make a blanket recommendation on phosphorus and potash without having the soil test recommendations. Now is also a good time to establish new pastures. If you have some worn out pastures that you're looking to try to establish, between now and say about the end of June, it is a good time to try to establish these pastures. Some choices that you could have, probably the best choice would be common Bermuda grass. You can buy the seed at a local co-op or feed store. You can plant that about 5 to 7 pounds of seed per acre. Common Bermuda grass seed is very, very small. So you may need to mix it with some fertilizer to broadcast it out. I know a lot of the co-ops, they'll mix the seed with the fertilizer and they come out and plant it for you. The next option is Bahia grass, and Bahia grass kind of has its pros and cons. It's not as palatable as say Bermuda grass is, but it doesn't take as much fertilizer either. So it works all right for people that really don't want to spend a lot of money on their pasture. But for most horse owners, I really think common Bermuda grass is probably a little better quality and a little better way to go. So if you're going to establish a new pasture, you basically need to prepare a clean tilled seed bed, kind of prepare it like you would a garden almost. Take care of all the weeds, get it cleaned up good, and then pack it to make sure it's firm. Then you can broadcast the seed and fertilizer together out there, and then lightly harrow or roll the seed bed in with some type of a packer or roller. You do not want to plant this Bermuda grass very deep. About 1/4 of an inch is really all the deeper it needs to go. And then if possible, it's a good idea to try to do all this just prior to a rain. So if you can get the seed out there, get some rain on it, you should be in business. The absolute worst thing to have happen is to get everything planted and then turn off dry for 2 or 3 weeks. That's really going to hamper the establishment, how fast your pasture is going to get established. So trying to get a new pasture established is very labor intensive, expensive, and so by all means, if you have some pastures that maybe just need a little bit of renovation, that may be a little bit better than trying to establish it from scratch. Now, if you do have a new planting, I would not count on getting much grazing with it that first year. So you may gonna have to have some other areas where you can put the horses to do some grazing while that pasture is getting established. If you do get the weather conditions right, you get timely rainfall, you might be able to get some grazing later on during the year, but I wouldn't count on a whole lot of grazing that first year. Also, plan on doing a lot of mowing, because anytime you go in there and do any type of tillage, you're going to encourage weeds to come on. And the Bermuda grass needs full sunlight. So the weeds are just going to be shading out the Bermuda grass that you're trying to get growing. you pretty much want that pasture to look like a golf course that first year. Just go out and do, plan on doing a lot of mowing because you want to try to keep those weeds from shading the Bermuda grass. And hopefully by the end of the summer, you'll have a decent stand of Bermuda grass. And heading into the next spring, you come in there and fertilize, and hopefully you'll have a solid stand of Bermuda grass that you can definitely look at grazing that next year. But again, I wouldn't plan on a whole lot of production out of that Bermuda grass during the establishment year. Another thing coming up here in a few weeks, around the 1st of June, it's an ideal time to try to control any broadleaf weeds that you may have some issues with. Now, mowing works pretty well for control of a lot of different types of weeds, pig weeds, things like that. And what we've found is the application of a quart breaker of a 2,4-D or maybe Weedmaster does a pretty good job on controlling most broadleaf weeds. 2,4-D at a quart breaker will cost about $3 per acre, so it's pretty cheap, and it does a pretty good job that time of year. Now, if you wait till, say, mid-July or August, we usually don't get quite a good of control with these products during the late summer, just because the weeds aren't actively growing all that well, and they just don't take up the herbicide real well. So 1st of June is an ideal time to try to control broadleaf weeds. Now, if you have some grassy weeds like, maybe some clumps of smut grass or vasi grass, you can just use a little 1 gallon sprayer, go around and spot treat each clump with Roundup. Now, getting into a very vague area here, I know a lot of horse owners don't like spraying with chemicals because they may cause some issues with the horses. But if you read the label, most of these broadleaf herbicides say there's no grazing restrictions at all with horses. But I always try to play things on the safe side. I don't think it's a bad idea to remove the horses from the pasture that's been sprayed with 2,4-D or Weedmaster for about a week, especially if the conditions are pretty dry. You know, give the opportunities for that herbicide to get incorporated into the plants before you put the horses back on there. But if you read the labels closely, most of them will say there's no grazing restriction of horses at all. But again, I try to be a little bit conservative with that. And with Roundup, it does say on the label to remove the horses for 14 days. So again, if you come in there and spot treat some clumps of vasi grass or something like that, remove the horses for 14 days before you put them back in there. Now, another thing is stocking rate. Kind of a rule of thumb is the stocking rate for horses should be about 2 acres per horse. And I know some of you may be on limited acreage, and that may not be possible. But again, that's kind of a rule of thumb is 2 acres per horse. And if it's possible, use some type of a rotational system. Doesn't have to be too complex. If you can just string up a hot wire where you can maybe divide the pasture even in half, where you can graze half of it and leave the other half alone for a while. It gives the plants a chance to rest. Or you can even get a little more intensive and maybe divide it into 4 areas where you graze the horses on one paddock for say a week or so. That leaves the other 3 paddocks a chance to rest, and then you can move them around and graze each paddock in succession.
Hey, Ed, before you go on, I just want to make one point to everybody who's listening. When he's talking about stocking rate, about it being 2 acres per horse, that's if you're going to use your pasture only to meet all of the nutritional needs for your horse. If you're using it for turnout time or exercise, that number can be a little bit skewed. But if you're looking for your pastures to provide all of the nutritional needs for your horse, you need a minimum of 2 acres per horse.
Yeah, that's a good point. But the idea, I know most not only horse owners, but a lot of cattle producers also use a continuous system where they have the livestock out there all the time. And the main issue with that is you're not giving the plants any kind of rest at all. Think about your lawn, for example. You know, you may have Bermuda grass lawn or centipede or St. Augustine or something, but you don't mow your lawn every day. You know, you mow it, then give it a week or 10 days or so to recover and regrow. So if we have livestock out there that are constantly grazing plants over and over again and not giving them a chance to rest and recover, after a while, those plants are going to lose their vigor, and you may start seeing some weeds and things like that coming in there. So I know that acreage is limited with some of you folks, so that may not be an option. But if you do have enough acreage, try some type of a simple rotation system to give your plants a little bit of a chance to rest and recover. One final thing here, as far as hay testing goes, we used to have a forage testing lab where you could send in samples and have them analyzed for nutrient content, crude protein, and TDN. We do not have that lab available any longer. But there are several labs around the area. I know we send samples to either the University of Georgia or Texas A&M University has a forage testing lab. If you want to submit a sample to either one of those labs, just type in, say, like University of Georgia forage testing lab, and then you can download and print out all of the forms that you need. I think the cost is about $15 or $20 per sample, but it gives you a pretty good idea of what the crude protein and TDN values of the hay is that you're feeding. So anyway, that's just kind of an overview of some things that I see going on right now. Again, these cool nights have kind of stymied our warm season grass production for the time being. I think that's going to change here, obviously, the further we get into May. But these cool nights are kind of letting these cool season plants hang around for a while longer than they normally do. So that's about all I had as far as slides go. I'd be happy to try to answer any questions. So.
Yeah, I've got one point I want to make before we go on with, we've got a bunch of questions popping up for you, but I do want to make sure that you guys understand rotational grazing is not only beneficial for your plants and your grass to kind of reestablish and to rest and to get rid of some of that weed structure. It's also good for the soil, right? Because especially down here in areas that have a lot of that gumbo mud or a high clay portion in the soil, it'll reduce compaction rates and the mud holes that we end up getting from all the traffic of the horses. And the other thing that it does, it's beneficial for the horses, it will reduce your parasite load as well. So keep in mind when you're deworming, after you do your deworming, you can move your horses to another pasture and then keep working through. So you're not, after you're deworming them, they're not consuming the parasites that they just expelled. So anyhow, other than that, we've got a couple, and I'll just start rolling through these questions. So Julia, she asks, when you mow the weeds out of your newly established pasture, how do you avoid mowing the forage? So I think I understand that. Do you understand that question?
Well, yeah. So when you're trying to get the Bermuda established, it's going to be, I mean, those seedlings are going to be pretty low to the ground. So, you know, if you mow at least 3 or 4 inches above the ground, that should be fine. Now, granted, that may put a little bit of mulch over the top of the Bermuda grass. I've seen instances where, I guess the big thing is you don't want the weeds to get too tall. You know, once they start getting above the Bermuda, just kind of set your mower so you're not mowing the Bermuda grass, you're clipping off the weeds. But you know, if the weeds get real tall and you go in and mow them, you can put a lot of mulch on top of the Bermuda grass that's going to inhibit it from growing. So, yeah, just try to get on those weeds. Once they get above where the Bermuda grass is trying to grow, I would go in there again. You want to try to keep it like a golf course. Keep it mowed down relatively short. The Bermuda grass, like I say, can handle a lot of sunlight. So try to get those weeds off there. But again,
One of the
typically, when you get the Bermuda established, it's not going to be real tall anyway.
And I think one of the points too, maybe that in that first year while you're mowing and trying to establish, you need to remember that this is not a year that you're going to be allowing horses to graze on it anyways. It's not going to be providing enough nutrition.
No.
It's not going to be tall enough to meet those needs in the first place.
Yeah.
So really, if you do end up clipping a little bit of the Bermuda, it's not going to be the end of the world because you're not using it for the intended purpose that first year.
Right, and Bermuda grass is very resilient. Even if you do clip a few of the leaves, it'll regrow pretty rapidly. So, I mean, as long as you're not mowing right down on top of the ground, I think you'll be fine. As long as it's, say 3 inches or so above the ground, it should be fine.
All right, and then Catherine asks, do you recommend overseeding with ryegrass in the fall?
Some people, that's kind of a tough question. Some people like to graze ryegrass with horses and some don't. It's kind of a judgment call, really. You can certainly do that. The ryegrass is very high quality as long as you don't have the horses out there on there too long. I mean, you can have some nutritional issues with real high quality ryegrass, but if you kind of limit graze them, let them go out there, and I wouldn't have them out there all the time. I guess what I'm trying to say, I'd maybe have a supplemental pasture where you could maybe put them out there for an hour or two a day and move them back into a holding area. But absolutely, ryegrass can be used, and you can overseed your summer sod very easily.
Great. Yeah, the recommendations that we have for ryegrass, and actually Howard Cormier has a really great publication out on how he manages the way he plants ryegrass. The way we manage it at the LSU farm, because Mr. Randy plants, we plant at least half of our pastures in rye for the winter. We can manage all of our horses, and I think there's maybe 60 horses total on that farm. We can manage all of those horses on rye through the winter without having to supplement maybe 3 or 4 round bales through the coldest parts of the winter. And we do exactly what Dr. Twidwell says. We will turn them out for a minimum of an hour in small increments to start. We'll let them out for an hour. And if you look at the nutritional requirements for a horse, if you have high quality ryegrass, you can actually meet all of your horse's individual nutrient needs or requirements for the day in 4 hours of grazing. So once you work them up to that 4-hour time frame, you can put them on that pasture for 4 hours, bring them back off. They will have met their nutritional needs, and then everything else that they're doing to graze is just kind of habitual, more behavioral thing. You don't necessarily need to eat anything else if they've got quality ryegrass. So, but you do need to be careful, especially if you have those horses that are metabolic or the easy keepers that stay fat on air. Ryegrass probably is not the best option for those horses, as you can cause laminitic bouts with all of those. But if you have horses that are just regular maintenance and stay healthy or that are fairly active, ryegrass is definitely a fantastic way to manage your horses throughout the winter without having to supplement with more expensive feeds like alfalfa and things like that.
Right, and you don't have to plant all of your acreage to ryegrass either. Maybe a quarter of a third of your acreage that you normally have, because again, you're not going to be grazing it all the time. So.
And for those of you who are watching, once we post this video, I'll make sure to post a link to Howard's publication so you guys can see how he manages his stuff too. Julia asks, should the ideal pasture have only warm season grass, cold season grass, or a mixture of both?
Well, we're looking at different times of year. We just mentioned ryegrass. That's a cool season grass. So you would plant that, say, mid-October, and it would give you grazing until about this time of year. But it's not going to give you any grazing during the summer. It's a cool season plant. So again, we start getting into temperatures in the 80s. It's just going to start dying out.
Right.
Whereas
so that's the thing we need to, if we're going to have a ryegrass pasture, it's not something that you plant once. You have to replant that every year.
Right. Yeah. The ryegrass is an annual event. The other thing is, where you plant the ryegrass, that is going to slow down your warm season grasses from coming on starting this time of year. So again, that's why you wouldn't want to plant all your acreage to ryegrass, because that'll really it impedes the warm season grasses from coming on. So it's a kind of a timing thing. Again, you can use the cool season plants like ryegrass during the winter and spring, and then we'll use the warm season grasses during the summer. Again, things like Bermuda grass or Bahia grass. They are going to have a little bit of a transition this time of year, but there's no way you're going to have the cool season grasses growing during, say, June and July. That's kind of the point, I guess, there.
So Julia, I think you're going to have a mixture, right? You're going to have your warm season grasses in the warm seasons, and then you really need to switch gears and have your cool season grasses in the cool season, if that's how you want to manage your property and your horses. If you don't have the availability to have two separate areas, or to kind of manage your property more effectively where you can have two separate pastures, you may just need to stick with one that's more efficient for your property. Howard asks, will Bahia grass choke out Bermuda?
A lot of it depends on your fertilization. If you don't fertilize very, very much with nitrogen, that's going to tend to favor the Bahia grass. However, if you do fertilize pretty heavily with nitrogen, that's going to tend to favor the Bermuda grass. So a lot of it depends upon how much your inputs you're putting in there. Now, again, a lot of people like Bahia grass because it can grow and thrive and do pretty well without a lot of nitrogen fertilizer. Bermuda grass needs nitrogen, a lot of nitrogen. So again, it just kind of depends upon which way you're going there. That's kind of a question that can be answered in two different ways, I guess. Again, it depends upon your management style. Low input is going to favor the Bahia. A higher input is going to favor the Bermuda grass.
All right, here's another question. Jamie asks, dumb question, but if you use 2,4-D to weed a field, when do you reseed?
What's she asking there? I'm not quite sure.
Yeah, and so she said, if you use 2,4-D to weed a field, comma, you reseed when? So when would you reseed after you use 2,4-D?
Oh, there's really no issues with as far as planting anything else back in there. There's no restrictions. I guess she's talking about maybe planting a clover or something in there. There's no real issues with 2,4-D or Weedmaster. Now, some of the newer products, they have a lot of restrictions on clovers. Things like Grazon, P plus D or Grazon Next. They are absolute clover killers, and that's why I didn't really mention them here, because if you want any clover in there at all, I would just stay with 2,4-D or Weedmaster, because they're not going to have any type of restrictions. But there are some chemicals out there that absolutely, if you use them, you're not going to be able to plant clover back in those areas for several years. So, but 2,4-D is very, very safe in that regard.
Yeah, she said perfect. That's exactly what she was asking.
Okay. Yeah, again, I avoid some of the newer chemicals. Again, Grazon Next, Grazon P plus D. Those are the main ones that I can think of.
Okay. Howard just had a comment about how he grazes his fields, when his ryegrass fields. He says he grazes 1.5 hours to 2 hours twice a day each time. It takes management, but splits up the grazing time. So that's more of a feeding, horse management type skill he's displaying there. And I guess I should be clear about how you increase those increments. From the management that we use at our farm, we like to increase them over 2 to 4 weeks. So we'll put them out for 1 hour for a week. We'll put them out for 2 hours the next week. We'll put them out for 3 hours the next week. Put them out for 4 hours. So by the end of a month, they should be able to be turned out on those fields for about 4 hours at a time without any problems. Now, again, that's knowing the animals you have, knowing if you have any horses that have laminitic issues, knowing any horses that you may have that may have metabolic issues, you need to be very careful how you manage those horses if they have any other underlying medical issues.
Right. Yeah, I think that's where people get into issue with ryegrass. They kind of turn them out there and forget about them, and that's where you can run into some issues. So it definitely, to me, ryegrass is definitely much more management oriented than say your summer pastures with a Bermuda or Bahia. You kind of turn them out there and not worry too much about them.
Well, Howard's got a great point. He said he wintered four horses on 1.75 acres this year. So it really is doable for small farms.
Yes.
You just got to put the time in.
Yeah. Just management. Absolutely. Yes.
Catherine asks, how do you control foxtail?
Foxtail in a pasture, not very easily. I guess if you just have a little bit of it, you can go in there and spot treat with Roundup. There's really not any broadcast applications of any chemicals they're going to take that out very well. You can mix up, say, if you have like a little 1 gallon little pump up sprayer. We usually go with like a 2% solution, so it'd be 2 parts Roundup to 98% water, and you can just go around to each clump and spray the clumps till they're wet. And that works pretty well. But again, according to the label, you're supposed to remove the horses for 2 weeks after you do that.
Right. Let me check one up. I'm gonna look one more place to see. Do we have any more questions? I'm gonna wait for just a second. I'd like to take just a second to, while we're talking about pasture management, one of the things that I have learned the immense value of, besides knowing what exactly is all right, we'll get to that, Howard, in just a second. One of the things that I found that's so crazy important for managing pastures, specifically in South Louisiana, all of you probably have gone through the same thing. You go out to the pasture, it has dumped. Unexpectedly, it has rained, and we've got 4 inches of rain in 2 hours. You walk outside to go feed your horses, and you are knee deep in water and mud, and that takes, I don't know, a week and a half to dissipate. And we're walking through gates and areas over and over, bringing horses in and out of the barn or in and out of the pasture. And we have now created this giant mud hole. And one of the things that people refuse to believe me that actually is a benefit, but we did it at our own farm, is we have instituted what we call best management practices called sacrifice areas. And a sacrifice area is exactly that. You sacrifice that small piece of land between your 2 gates that you're walking in and out of, and you create kind of a little pad of geotextile layers that prevents this big mud hole, gumbo, hoof print situation going on, and you don't lose your boot. It's not a nightmare to walk through. It doesn't hold water afterwards, okay? So you're essentially creating a little bit of a hardened pad that grass will not grow on. You won't get a mud pit. It takes management, and a simple way that you do this, and again, I'll post a link to this at the bottom of this conversation when we're done. But basically, you go in and you dig out a little bit. You can put a geotextile fabric that stabilizes the soil, and then you can put some crushed concrete or some pea gravel and different layers of particles. And then on the top, you're going to put a little bit of sand on it so your horses don't hurt their feet. And basically, you've created a barrier to a big mud hole. I promise you, the labor that it takes to put these in will save you years of losing boots and hating to walk out into that pasture. So that's my little soapbox for the only thing I'm really good at in pasture management is getting rid of mud holes. Sand alone will not work. I promise you, we've tried that. You got to do a little bit more work. Just adding sand to it will seem like you're doing yourself a favor, but you get another big flood or another big storm, and you're back in the same situation you started in.
Neely, is there a cost sharing assistance available for putting those in?
You know, I'm not real sure. I know in some other there may be, depending upon your location, to say like if you're really close to a watershed area, or if you're in a, if you're right next to one of the big rivers, there, to reduce runoff, there may be an opportunity to cost share some of that. But I think if you're just building it on your own property, I honestly haven't looked into that. It's a good question.
Yeah, I guess you'd have to check with the NRCS, your local NRCS office and see.
Yeah. You can do it relatively cheaply. Now, since I started looking into this and kind of helping people build these sacrifice areas, a lot of new products have come out, and you can, the products at geotextile price range go from, I think, 30 cents a square foot up to like $13 a square foot. You can go crazy spending a ton of money on this, but you can do it really cheaply too. We have a couple more questions. Howard asked if you can comment about the importance of planting dates.
As far as planting dates, well, with the summer forages like Bermuda grass and Ryegrass, now is the ideal time to do that. May and June is the ideal time for anything as far as the summer grasses go. Now your cool season plants like ryegrass, or if you want to put any clovers in there, that would be in the fall. If you're overseeding, that's going to be about mid-October. Some people will go in and plant the ryegrass early on a prepared seed bed, but that involves tilling the sod up and actually planting it into a clean tilled seed bed. And that would be about say the third week in September. So that's kind of the guidelines there. And again, I want to emphasize the clovers. A lot of people think you can plant clovers this time of year, but it's really not the ideal time to plant clovers. Clovers are much better planted in the fall with your ryegrass.
You also have to be careful with horses specifically. If you're unaware, there are some clovers that will cause excess salivation, and I believe it's the red clover that does that to horses. And it'll, if you've never seen it before, you would think your horse has rabies because they are literally foaming at the mouth. It's because there's a small toxicity to it. It doesn't necessarily hurt them. There's other things available for them to eat. So just be mindful if you do try to plant clover, you can have an excess amount of salivation in your horses. Triple C Services says they have very easy keepers, so they limit grazing on green grass this time of year. When you return them to a dry lot each day, do I need to keep hay out for them? I would say yes, and not necessarily for their nutritional needs. I like to keep hay in front of my horses for a number of reasons, right? It keeps them away from boredom and finding other bad habits like cribbing or weaving or picking on other horses in the pasture with them. From learning how to open gates and release themselves into the wild. Yes, my mare likes to do that if she has nothing to do. I also like to do it just to kind of keep them busy, prevent their stomachs from completely emptying, right? If you look at the physiology of a horse, they're designed to eat multiple small meals throughout the day. So if we restrict them from eating, we're creating a situation in their gastrointestinal tract that could result in some negative things like ulcers or potential colic when they do eat again. So I always like to keep something out there for them to eat, even if it's low quality. You just don't want it to be so low quality that it can cause impaction, colics, or things like that. It doesn't necessarily have to be, high quality, super expensive alfalfa available for them. Perfect. Yeah, we're trying to get as much information out about this as we can. I know this is not necessarily the easiest way to get our information out to you guys, but at least we can answer some questions. Tiffany says that they have a pasture that's been overtaken by what looks like poison ivy. What can she do?
Well, as far as poison ivy, Roundup is pretty effective on poison ivy, and Roundup is pretty cheap. So I think I would go in and hit that area with Roundup. It may take multiple applications to get rid of it completely, but poison ivy is pretty sensitive to Roundup. I think that's probably the best herbicide option to go with there.
Okay, how about
I'd maybe spray it and then maybe look at trying to once it starts dying, come in and mow off the excess. And hopefully if it won't regrow, but if it does regrow, you can hit it again with the Roundup.
we also have another question about burning nettle. Digging doesn't work. Is there anything we can spray it?
The burning nettle. It's very difficult to control. I know I've had people tell me they've tried everything under the sun and nothing seems to work real well. I would I don't think 2,4-D or Weedmaster are going to work very well. You're going to have to use something a little more concentrated, like a Graze On Next would probably be the best option. But again, the Graze On Next will also kill clovers too, so you got to be a little bit careful with it. But yeah, I've had people say they just haven't had any luck with anything. So that's a difficult weed to try to control. Plus, it's one that's very nasty if you happen to touch it. So.
Howard says, watch for armyworms and early ryegrass in Bermuda? Question mark.
Possibly. The armyworms are typically an issue on Bermuda grass. I don't know. Normally, it's a little bit later in the summer when we start seeing issues with the armyworms. You know, if you start seeing some birds in your fields, a pretty good indication you might have some armyworms. The way they get their name though is they move like an army. So one day you can have a nice looking pasture, the next day it can be shredded. So normally once we get into say late June, July is a pretty good time to kind of keep an eye out for them. There's a lot of different insecticides you can use to control armyworms. Just you have to be on your toes as far as making sure you get the insecticide out there to get the worms out of your field. They're normally not a big issue on ryegrass, though. It's mainly Bermuda grass, but with ryegrass, the only time we have much of an issue with it is for people that plant it early on a prepared seed bed, say in the third week of September or so. Sometimes it's still green enough that the armyworms will attack early seeded ryegrass. Normally with overseeded ryegrass, it's not an issue.
All right, what about cockleburrs? Prevalent in one of our pastures. Can we use 2,4-D for that?
No, the 2,4-D is not going to be very effective. Again, I would spot treat that with Roundup. Again, mix up about a 2-3% solution of Roundup and water and just try to spray down the plants as good as possible. Just don't think 2,4-D is going to be very effective on it.
Anybody else have any comments, questions? Well, we've got Dr. Twidwell available. I know one of the things I get a lot of questions about every year is about those horrible yellow flowers in our pastures. And I usually get them after the flowers are, knee high.
What you're talking about there, buttercup, and that stuff will actually start germinating in December. And but most people don't really notice it till say March or April, and it'll dry around. All of a sudden, they see their pasture just full of these yellow flowers. And really, the best time to control it is in December or January. They're very easy to control. We'll go in with about a pint per acre of 2,4-D, which is about $1.50 an acre, very, very cheap. But if you get, say, a 60-degree weather day in December or January, that's the time to do it. When you get a nice sunshiny day, that's the time to do it. If you wait till March or April, not only do you need to up the amount of 2,4-D you apply, but also you're more likely to do damage to your clovers that time of year. During December or January, the clovers really haven't put out a lot of growth yet. So you can effectively control the buttercup, again, with a pint of 2,4-D per acre without affecting your clovers. But timing is the key there. Don't wait till you start seeing all those yellow flowers, because you've waited a little bit too long.
Yeah, and another point to make with that is buttercup is actually considered toxic to horses.
Yes.
I've never heard of a horse actually eating copious amounts of buttercup unless there's nothing else available. So
Right.
don't over concern yourself with the fact that it's toxic. Just make sure that your horse has something else to eat. So if your pasture is completely bare and the only thing growing is buttercup, probably not the best idea to turn them out in.
Right. Yeah, I think it has kind of a bitter taste to it, so it's not real palatable for really any type of livestock.
Would I need to reseed after using Roundup in a pasture with Bermuda if we spray for the poison ivy?
I would probably not, because Bermuda grass can take a pretty good amount of Roundup, and as long as it's less than say a quart per acre that you're putting out there, that should not hurt the Bermuda grass at all. No. Now, if it was Bahia grass, I would not do that at all. If it was on Bahia grass, if it was Bahia grass, I'd maybe try to spot treat if I could, because Bahia grass is not very tolerant of Roundup, but Bermuda grass is.
Great. Does anybody else have any other questions or comments that we would like Dr. Twidwell to address for us before we go? Howard, do you have any other more comments? You two are the people I usually rely on for all of my pasture questions. So nothing? I see, Howard, you unmuted yourself. Did you? Are you able to join us? Oh, Julia asks what our thoughts are on Timothy.
Timothy, we're in the wrong state to try to grow Timothy. That's more of a northern grass. It grows really well in say Minnesota, Wisconsin, that area, but down here, it's just not gonna compete very well at all. The summers are going to take it out. Basically, it's just not going to be able to survive the heat and humidity we have here. So I would avoid Timothy. Now Timothy makes a nice hay. I mean, if you want to look at importing some Timothy hay that you can feed your horses, it makes a very good hay. It's just that we can't grow it here at all.
Julia just said she's in Tennessee.
Okay.
Well, there.
Oh. You'd have a lot better chance there than it would here. Absolutely, yes. I have to go look at my recommendations for Tennessee, but I would think that it would probably be okay there. Yes. The big issue with Timothy is it can't tolerate very intense cutting. You're only going to be able to cut it maybe twice a year because it just is not able to regrow very rapidly.
Okay, Triple C Services asks again, when we're mowing our pasture, should horses be kept out of the area so they don't eat those clippings? There is an issue, I know, specifically with grass, normal like lawn grass clippings, and what happens, and Dr. Twidwell, back me up on this and you can explain this process. What can happen is once you clip those clippings, the sugar is going to concentrate in those tips. And any type of horse that has a metabolic tendency or has a tendency for laminitis or laminitic bouts, you need to be very careful. You can also cause a lot of GI upset if they eat those grass clippings specifically. But I'm not sure about leaving them out if you mowed your pasture. I've never had an issue with that.
No, I've never really had an issue with that. Can't really think of any major issues there. I know in lawns the big concern is people have treated them with herbicides or insecticides or whatever, and you don't want any of residual to affect livestock in any way there. But the biggest issue I've seen with clippings is that, again, if you have a lot of material there, it can kind of smother out the grasses that you're trying to grow. So in those areas, if you have to have a big area where there's a lot of clippings, you may need to go in there and kind of spread those clippings out a little bit so they're not smothering the grass that you're trying to grow. But other than that, I've never encountered any toxicity issues that I've heard of.
Yeah, and I think one thing that you may need to be mindful of is depending on, the grasses that you should be mowing at this point, the tops of them are going to be fairly impalatable to horses in general, because horses are selective grazers. So they'll find the things that are tasty and they'll overgraze those areas. So the things that you're able to mow are going to be things that they're not really interested in eating in the first place. And they should be more fibrous, more woody things that they're really not overly concerned with. I think the problem that you see with grass clipping specifically is if you look at a grass lawn that you have mowed, the clippings can get fairly wet and fairly compacted as well. So they're getting like this bolus effect that's sitting in their stomach. I think that could be more of a mechanical issue as far as I'm chewing than anything else. Here are a couple more questions. Howard says, one more thing, fertilize when ryegrass is 3 inches tall to get as much growth as possible before the winter turns cold. Ryegrass makes very little growth when average temperatures fall below 55 degrees. Yeah, and Triple C Services, you're right. I think the mechanical issue is more the choke issue that we were talking about with the grass clippings was more of an issue than actual any of the sugar content or the toxicity issue.
Okay.
I've never personally, I keep my horses out on 2 different pastures and we'll mow everything at the same time. And the long clippings they've stayed out on top of them. They don't even touch the long clippings. It just kind of gets balled up and flies.
The only time I've really seen much issue with mowing is if people let the weeds get really, really tall and there's just a lot of material out there. When you mow that, it can create a pretty kind of a mat that may inhibit the Bermuda grass from trying to grow. But again, don't let the weeds get too tall. I guess what I'm trying to say, as long as they're not too tall and you kind of spread them out, I don't really think should be too much of an issue.
What about elderberry? Will Roundup kill it?
Oh, I can't say I've ever tried that on, you may need to go something a little bit stronger on that with, say, Graze On Next or Graze On P plus D or possibly Remedy. It's kind of a brushy type plant. I would think you would need something like Graze On Next or Remedy to take that out. Not sure Roundup's going to work real well on that.
And then how does brush hogging a full pasture instead of baling it hurt the next year's grass crop?
What's that, bush hogging?
Yeah, bush hogging a full pasture instead of baling it hurt the following year's grass?
Oh, I don't really see any negative impact there. No. I can't think of any negative. To me, the big thing would be getting the weeds clipped and keep them from shading out the grasses we have. So I can't really see any negative impacts there.
All right, and Tiffany asks, can horses graze a couple of hours a day on grass lawns? I'm gonna go ahead and say that's probably not the best recommendation for a couple of reasons. The type of grass, if you're here in Louisiana, you have horses on your property, it's probably not the kind of planted sod grass that we usually have trouble with. It's probably just whatever common grass grows in the area. However, like Dr. Twidwell said, if you're putting any herbicides, any pesticides on that grass, it's going to be concentrated and they're going to get more of it when they're eating in specific grass lawns. I also worry about the type of grass that we're actually having come up in our lawns. I personally don't think it's the best option, but if that's the only grass that you have available for your horses to graze in, I think it would be okay. I think I would just introduce it to them a little more slowly than just turning them out. Dr. Ed, you have any comments on that?
Well, I know a lot of the lawn grasses, say like centipede grass or St. Augustine grass, probably don't have a lot of real good nutritional value. I mean, I think they'd be okay to graze as long as they haven't been treated with fungicides or insecticides or something like that, because the chemicals you use on lawns are not labeled for livestock use at all, because they haven't done any of the livestock testing. So things that spray on lawns, you can't use them in your pasture. So that'd be the only thing I'd be concerned about there uh, would be the fungicides or insecticides. If you have lawns that haven't had anything on them, I guess you can maybe get some use out of some of these grasses, like again, the carpet grass, the centipede grass. They're typically just not real upright growing, so there's probably not going to be a lot of production there. But
yeah, I worry about the nutritional content in the type of grasses that we have in lawns. It sounds, I'm going to take a wild stab at this and assume that since you're asking, you're not living in like a subdivision or an HOA, and that your pasture is, or your lawn is probably more like what your pasture would be anyways. Just keep in mind some of the things you may have to deal with. Like I'm looking at my lawn right now, and it's not sprayed. We don't do anything to it except for mow it. So I technically could put a horse out here, except it has never had any type of pressure on it. So it's really spongy. So keep in mind that, you know, the soil may not be able to withstand having that animal stand on it for long periods of time. I don't see where there'd be a medical issue if it is a normal, if it is a field like all of your other pastures are, it just hasn't been sprayed. I would, like, just for common sense sake and just to kind of see what would happen, I would turn them out or hand graze them a little bit and see how they do and see if that causes any GI upset. If it's a different kind of grass that's in your pasture, you want to be careful that the big change from one pasture to another isn't going to cause any upset. And I think honestly that's all of the questions we've got. One more chance for anybody left on. Look back. One more time. Okay, looks like we're good. Thank you guys so much for joining us. Thank you for participating and asking all of your questions. Honestly, this is the most interaction we've had out of all of our presentations, which is fantastic. Again, for any of you who have any questions or who watch this after this is published, please feel free to reach out to either me or Dr. Twidwell. We both work for the Ag Center. We're both extension specialists, so it's our job to provide this information and to help y'all out. I will post my email information in the links below, so if you have any questions, feel free to reach out. And oh, we've got one more. What about putting round bales of hay in the pasture? Yeah, so that's a common process that we do, Charity, especially through the winter. And even in the summertime, depending upon the number of animals that you have in your pasture, that's going to be speaking more to your stocking rate and the density of animals that you have on your land. We personally in the winter, even if they are on ryegrass pastures or especially in winters if they're not on ryegrass pastures, we will put round bales out kind of in an area where they can get out of the elements. The best way for horses to maintain body heat and to stay warm is actually through metabolism and through eating. So as much forage as possible. So adding extra hay to their diet, especially through the winter months, is really helpful to help them stay warm. And putting round bales out in their pasture throughout the summer months, depending upon what's growing, may or may not be necessary. If you have a small pasture and lots of horses, you probably will need to supplement with some type of hay, whether it's round bales or square bales or flakes of hay, or bringing them in to feed at specific times. But depending on the space you have and the nutritional needs you have of your horses, you may need to supplement with extra round bales.
Yeah, my only comment, don't put out too much hay at one time. You know, with our weather conditions, you may get some rain damage and things like that, or the horse may stomp on it and waste it. So just kind of figure out how much hay you need and put that out.
Yeah, fantastic. Yeah, we're getting a lot of, and I promise you the round bales, usually if you put out too many round bales, they'll start turning it into bedding, not into eating. So you don't want to waste it.
Right.
All right, guys. Well, I'm going to post those links to Mr. Howard's ryegrass article, I'll be posting some stuff about sacrifice areas, and I'll be posting links to how to get in touch with us if you have any more questions. Thank you guys again. Thank you, Dr. Twidwell, for your time and your effort. We appreciate you.
Enjoyed it.
Thanks, guys.
Okay.